of state and government began to address on Tuesday the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly, or the UNGA. Climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, and security issues have so far taken center stage at the annual gathering. U.S. President Joe Biden delivered his debut address amid strong doubts about his ability to bring the U.S. back to the position of global leadership, pledging to work toward a, quote, peaceful, prosperous future for all, end of quote. Biden has taken a reassuring tone amid global turbulence and transformation. Could words match deeds so multilateralism can work? What can the UN do to double down on multilateralism? Could the U.S. play well with others? For answers, I talked to Jeffrey Sachs, professor at Columbia University and former special advisor to the UN Secretary General. Let's listen to his thoughts. And now in New York, I'm joined by Jeffrey Sachs, a professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. Professor Sachs, always a pleasure. What a pleasure to see you once again.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
People have been talking about this week is the UN General Assembly meeting. And now various state leaders are delivering their messages to the world. Professor, I understand the Chinese president has been calling on three key points, that is security, development, and human rights. He said that would be the priority, should be the priority for the world. Your take?
He said that we have to end the pandemic. He talked about China devoting many vaccines for the world. He talked about a new initiative of development. So I'm very much looking forward to speaking with the Chinese officials about all of the follow-up, because I think this is very promising. The world needs something new, especially after being so shaken in the past 2 years by the pandemic. How we need cooperation for recovery, how we need new financing for a green and digital way forward. So in this sense, there actually was a lot of common vision, but a lot of shaken people also.
Professor Sachs, if you are being asked to prioritize what needs to be done at the leaders level of countries, what would you say?
First, peace and cooperation and dialogue, and avoid arms races so that we really can devote our resources to human well-being. This is the most important point. Cooperate. Use the UN Charter. This is the crucial point. Then second, achieve the goals that we have set. The Paris Agreement on Climate and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Then third, plan sensibly. In other words, a rational approach says, once you have goals, then define the path to achieving those goals transparently and clearly. And the fourth is help to finance those goals, because for the poorest countries, they cannot finance the human needs out of their own meager resources. Right. So either people are left to massive suffering, and we have promised, no, we're not going to do that. It's too cruel, too dangerous, too destabilizing. But then we need a serious approach on financing so that those who have can help those who do not have. And this is extremely important.
If you were being asked by your president to be an advisor about some still very challenging years ahead, in which there's going to be the midterm election, there's of course going to be the presidential election, there's party divide, there's society divisions. What would you suggest?
Well, I give advice even without being asked, because I write a lot of news columns, I write a lot of articles, so I give my advice. My advice is, first, cooperate with China, because we absolutely do not need tensions, arms races. We have to work together. I offer that advice every day. Second, think practically and think operationally. So we need to get vaccines to people we need to sit down, US and Chinese and Russian, European Union, Indian, UK, the companies and officials of government to work out an allocation strategy, very organized, very cooperative. And my third point is the UN can do a lot for all countries, for all governments, because the UN as an institution has on the ground presence all over the world, and it's respected. It's understood to be a legitimate presence. It's a presence because the countries want that presence. And so help the UN to deliver the support, especially for the poorer countries. But one of the funny things that's happened is that even with the vaccine needs, the UN has not been able to get the vaccines because the companies are making private deals, or the rich countries are taking the vaccines up first. So my advice to the US is stop trying to do everything, because obviously we're under such stress, but turn responsibilities over to the UN and cooperate globally. Stop wasting our time on conflict.
Professor Sachs, though, I have to ask you directly, can you do that, some of the things you just mentioned? On the one hand, contributing all these responsibilities to the United Nations, but on the other hand, do not regard the United Nations as relevant anymore and do things not necessarily based on the UN Charter. Can you do that? In other words, you only give out the responsibilities and leave to yourself all things that you think you can hold on to for your best interest. Is that the way to do things? Do you think others would buy that?
Well, this has been my complaint about U.S. foreign policy for quite a long time. And I wrote a book in 2019 called A New Foreign Policy Beyond American Exceptionalism, because I said we can't proceed on the grounds that the U.S. can do what it wants, call the shots, cooperate when it wants, not cooperate when it wants. Interestingly, I like President Biden on so many things, and he's trying to move our domestic agenda against really very reactionary opposition. But there is a mindset, even in this administration, so many times at the UN, President Biden said, allies and partners, allies and partners, allies and partners. And what he means is a very much an us versus them way of thinking. It was all about allies and partners. Now, that's better than America first or America alone. It's a step in a better direction, but it's not quite multilateralism in the right way yet, because it's still drawing lines. You're on the other side, we're on this side, we're good, you're not. And this is absolutely a wrong way to say things. President Biden was saying, we will lead. And then he said the next sentence, we've been at war for 20 years. I wish there were some reflection on that fact. The United States has been in really stupid, misguided, destructive wars for 20 years. And that should cause some self-reflection rather than saying, okay, the war's over, now we lead. It's not the right way. The wars are over, and now we think. And now we act with some little bit of forbearance, a little bit of more mutual respect would do a lot of good.
Now we see the issue of Afghanistan. It's also a hot topic on the UN General Assembly this week. Professor Sachs, after being in Afghanistan for 20 years, with very different agenda, do you see what is the role should be of the United States?
The role, I think, for all of the governments other than Afghanistan is through the UN, and specifically in this case, through the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council should take responsibility and in a way assign responsibility also to the UN agencies and systems to help on this. But in the Security Council, we have the US, China, Russia. Very important. All three are important to finding some way forward that doesn't lead to collapse. You know, the United States has impounded Afghanistan's foreign exchange reserves. That is contributing to a massive banking crisis right now. It will lead to an economic implosion unless there is an economic and financial strategy. And the United States, though, is, you know, obviously it's out, thank God, and it's not capable of solving this problem on its own. But it also can't just sit on Afghanistan's foreign exchange reserves as if that doesn't mean something very practical, because it's very, it causes an economic implosion. So what's the way out for the US? Multilateralize this so that there is some shared sense of responsibility for how to move forward, and that it's possible actually to design something realistic and not just sit there as now every economic institution implodes, and that could lead to both humanitarian crisis and more violence and the kind of disaster we don't want to happen.
Professor Sachs, I'm sure you're aware of what President Biden said to his domestic audience. I'm sure he assumed that the U.S. was not in Afghanistan for rebuilding. U.S. was not in Afghanistan for other reasons, but rather only U.S. was in Afghanistan for the security of the United States, that terrorism will not happen on the land of the United States. Now, that, of course, went contradictory to some of the earlier statements both him and other American leaders made at various occasions throughout the past 20 years. But the question really is, the U.S. politics changes. Is it fair to ask the world to consider all the commitments made by Washington change every 4 years or even fewer than that? If that is the case, what does that mean for U.S. commitment, and even more importantly, the U.S. credibility?
The problem in the U.S. right now is that our society is really deeply divided, or maybe the society isn't quite as divided as the political system. We have a political divide between two parties right down the middle that is paralyzing, and it's very antagonistic, completely almost nihilistic. The Republican Party, especially with Trump's influence, is extremely destructive to the U.S. well-being, by the way, internally. But it means no government really can speak for America right now, because President Biden struggles to get any vote through Congress. He can't pass legislation. Everything is up for grabs. The Republicans are trying to do everything to destroy the administration in order to win one or two houses of Congress in the November 2022 election.
Right.
And if they do that, they paralyze the government for the next 2 years, because they're hoping that by wrecking the U.S. for 2 more years, they would somehow come to power in 2024. It's an extraordinarily cynical, dangerous, destructive approach, but that's what's happening in America right now. So it's very hard for America to have a consistent policy on anything. You know, the president says, I speak for America, but America is so politically divided that he turns around the next moment to look domestically, and he's struggling to pass any legislation.
But one issue has to be clear, that one could be sympathetic and empathetic. However, the U.S., if not acting rightly on some of the key issues, those issues will come back and haunt the United States once again in the future. You see that in many occasions: Afghanistan, terrorism, Taliban, and Al-Qaeda, the list goes on. So, Professor Sachs, now another thing is about what is going to be the U.S. vision regarding China-U.S. relations. Everybody knows this is going to be one of the most crucial bilateral relations. And your president also talked to my president on the phone recently, but we haven't seen relations and policies change. But only right after that, something called AUKUS was being created, which is an alliance apparently between the U.S., Australia, and the United Kingdom. So Professor, how should we read all of these messages regarding whether the U.S. has learned the lessons, regarding whether the U.S. even not being responsible for everything in the world, but at least responsible for its own act and its own future?
Well, the sad truth is that the U.S. Political scene is fiercely in division on almost everything except China. There is a very uncomfortable, nasty, ill-informed, bipartisan anti-China sentiment right now. Now, it's stupid because I know these people don't know anything about the U.S.-China scene, by the way. Most of these people have never been to China. I don't know if they have a passport. They know nothing. But this has become quickly a kind of political talking point of both parties. It's really unpleasant. And I find it mind-boggling, actually, how quickly this view has come. My belief is that if China is very calm, careful, determined to promote multilateralism, development, the UN system, cooperation, that will work. I think that what I worry about, of course, is given the intemperate attitudes of the U.S., which I think are provocative. I'm absolutely against this new nuclear submarine deal with Australia, because why should we have an arms race right now? It makes no sense given our needs. But I hope that it just doesn't lead to provocation, escalation, because the world will get very dangerous. And right now, the U.S. is provoking. The U.S. is antagonistic. The U.S. in a bipartisan way is doing this, not in any thoughtful manner, in my opinion. I say this every day inside the United States. I find it dangerous, but I hope that very calm heads will prevail in other parts of the world and recognize this is not what we want. The Secretary General was very clear on this point today also. We do not want a Cold War. We do not want confrontation between the two big powers. It makes no sense for the world at all, and there's no cause for it whatsoever.
Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia University, always a pleasure. And thank you for being a responsible global citizen, Professor Sachs.
Good to be with you. Thanks so much.